Margaret Chen had never been the type to draw attention. At 38, she'd perfected the art of blending in. Her job as an IT consultant meant she spent most days behind a computer screen, fixing problems nobody else understood. Quiet, predictable, safe. That's exactly how she liked it. When she pulled up to her new house on Maple Drive with the moving truck, her elderly mother sitting beside her in the passenger seat, she felt something close to relief. The neighborhood looked perfect. Neat lawns, trimmed hedges, houses painted in soft yellows and blues, kids riding bikes down the sidewalk, an old man watering his roses. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happened. Her mother smiled, her wrinkled hand patting Margaret's arm. "This is nice, sweetheart. Really nice." Margaret helped her mother out of the car, careful with her fragile frame. The stroke had happened 2 years ago, and though her mother was recovering, she still needed help with daily tasks. That's why Margaret had moved them here, closer to better doctors, away from the cramped apartment where the stairs had become an enemy. The first few weeks passed like a pleasant dream. Neighbors waved from their driveways. A woman from 2 houses down brought over chocolate chip cookies. An older couple offered to help if she ever needed anything. Margaret set up her home office in the spare bedroom, installed the wheelchair ramp for her mother, and planted a small garden in the backyard. She'd wake up at dawn, sit in the garden, and do her meditation, 20 minutes of silence before the world woke up. It was her ritual, her anchor. What the neighbors didn't know, what nobody in this quiet suburban street could have guessed, was that Margaret had spent 15 years of her life in a dojo. She'd started karate at 13, a shy kid looking for confidence. By 23, she'd earned her 4th-degree black belt in Shotokan. She'd competed in tournaments across 3 states, taught self-defense classes to women and children, and could break boards with strikes that looked effortless but carried years of disciplined power behind them. Then came the injury. A tournament, a mistimed kick, a torn ligament that never quite healed right. The doctor said she could still practice, but the spark had dimmed. She'd found herself sitting in that dojo, watching her students, feeling like she was going through motions instead of living them. So she'd walked away, hung up her GI, packed her belts into a box in the closet, and never looked back. That was 5 years ago. Now she was just Margaret, the quiet IT lady who liked gardening and took care of her mom. Patricia Drummond lived 3 houses down, in the biggest house on the block. She was impossible to miss. Tall, loud, always dressed like she was heading to a business meeting even when she was just getting her mail. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection, her nails always done, her SUV always gleaming. She sold real estate, and she made sure everyone knew she was good at it. Really good. But Patricia had another title she wore with even more pride: HOA president. She'd held the position for 9 years, and she ran the neighborhood like a general commanding troops. Every mailbox had to be regulation black. Every lawn had to be mowed to exactly 3 inches. Christmas lights could go up December 1st, not a day earlier, and had to come down by January 10th. She had rules for everything, and she enforced them all. Margaret first met Patricia on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after moving in. She was kneeling in her garden pulling weeds when a shadow fell over her. "You must be the new neighbor." Margaret looked up, squinting against the sun. Patricia stood there, clipboard in hand, sunglasses pushed up on her head. "Hi, yes, I'm Margaret." She stood, wiping dirt from her knees, and extended her hand. Patricia's handshake was firm, almost aggressive. Her eyes scanned Margaret's yard like a detective looking for clues. "Patricia Drummond, HOA president, welcome to the neighborhood." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to stop by and give you a copy of our community guidelines, just so you're aware of our standards here." She thrust a thick packet of papers into Margaret's hands. Margaret flipped through it, surprised by the sheer number of pages. Rules about fence heights, approved paint colors, noise ordinances, parking restrictions. "Thank you," Margaret said politely. "I'll read through this. Please do." Patricia's eyes landed on something near Margaret's mailbox. "Is that your mailbox?" Margaret glanced over. "Yes." "It's not the right shade of black. That looks more like charcoal. We require jet black. You'll need to repaint it." Margaret blinked. The mailbox looked perfectly black to her, identical to every other mailbox on the street. "Oh, okay. I can do that. Also," Patricia pointed to the small garden gnome Margaret's mother had insisted on placing near the flowers. Lawn ornaments need to be approved by the HOA board. That's on page 47 of the guidelines. Whimsical decorations don't really fit our neighborhood aesthetic. Margaret felt a small knot forming in her stomach, but she kept her voice pleasant. I understand. I'll take care of it. Good. Patricia adjusted her clipboard. We like to maintain certain standards here. I'm sure you understand. Property values and all that. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and I noticed a van parked in your driveway yesterday for several hours. We have a 2-hour limit for guest parking. That was my mother's medical equipment delivery, Margaret explained. She needs... I'm sure, Patricia interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. Just make sure it doesn't become a regular thing. Welcome to the neighborhood. She walked away, leaving Margaret standing there with the packet of rules in her hands, the knot in her stomach tightening. That night, Margaret repainted the mailbox and moved the garden gnome to the backyard where her mother could still see it from the window. It seemed easier to just comply. She'd moved here for peace, after all. No drama, no conflict, just a quiet life. She had no idea that was about to become impossible. The emails started coming every week, sometimes twice a week, always from Patricia, always with the subject line, HOA violation notice. The first one came 3 days after Margaret repainted her mailbox. She opened it during her lunch break, expecting maybe a welcome message or neighborhood update. Instead, she found a formal complaint with photos attached. Her wind chimes, the small metal ones hanging from her porch that her mother loved listening to, were apparently creating excessive noise pollution and disturbing the peace of the neighborhood. Margaret stepped outside that afternoon and stood under the wind chimes. They made a soft, gentle tinkling sound when the breeze caught them. You could barely hear them from 5 feet away. But she took them down anyway. Her mother's face fell when she noticed they were gone, but Margaret just squeezed her hand and said, "It's okay, Mom. We don't need them." The next email came 4 days later. Her recycling bins were placed 3 inches outside the designated collection zone. Margaret went outside with a tape measure, confused. The bins were exactly where the garbage company had told her to put them, right next to everyone else's bins. But there was Patricia, standing across the street with her phone out, taking pictures. Margaret moved the bins. 3 inches to the left, then came the complaint about her mother's wheelchair ramp. Patricia had sent a formal letter to the HOA board, copied to Margaret, stating that the ramp was an eyesore affecting property values and that it hadn't been approved through proper channels. Margaret had to spend an entire day digging through paperwork, proving that the ramp was medically necessary and legally protected under disability access laws. The HOA board eventually sided with her, but Patricia sent her a private email afterward. Just 2 sentences, "This isn't over. There are other ways to maintain neighborhood standards." Margaret started to feel it then, that creeping sensation of being watched. She'd step outside to get the mail and catch Patricia standing in her yard, staring. She'd leave for work and notice Patricia's car idling at the corner, waiting. Once she came home to find Patricia literally going through her recycling bin, pulling out envelopes and examining them. "What are you doing?" Margaret had asked, keeping her voice calm even though her heart was pounding. Patricia didn't even look embarrassed. "Just making sure you're disposing of items correctly. We've had issues with people putting the wrong materials in recycling. That's my private trash. It's on the curb, public property." Patricia dropped a yogurt container back into the bin and walked away. Margaret stood there, hands shaking, wondering what kind of person goes through someone's garbage. She thought about calling the police, but what would she say? That her neighbor was being nosy? That didn't seem like enough. The situation got worse in month 3. Patricia started targeting Margaret's mother directly. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Margaret was at work when her mother called, her voice trembling. "Sweetheart, that woman came by again. The blonde one. She was yelling at me." Margaret left work immediately, breaking every speed limit getting home. She found her mother sitting on the couch, hands shaking, tears on her cheeks. The story came out in pieces. Patricia had confronted her mother in the driveway when the caretaker was helping her back inside after a doctor's appointment. She'd accused them of illegal parking, of violating guest parking rules, of treating the driveway like a public loading zone. Margaret's mother, already fragile from her stroke, had been terrified. She'd tried to explain, but Patricia had just gotten louder, pointing her finger, saying things like, "I don't care about your excuses," and "rules apply to everyone." That night, Margaret's mother didn't want to sit on the porch. She didn't want to go outside at all. She stayed inside with the curtains drawn, jumping at every sound. Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. She'd been patient. She'd been kind. She'd followed every ridiculous rule, painted every mailbox, moved every bin. But this? Going after her elderly, vulnerable mother? That was a line crossed. She attended the next HOA meeting. She'd prepared everything. Printouts of all Patricia's emails, photos of Patricia photographing her house, a timeline of harassment. She stood up during the open forum section and calmly presented her case to the board. Patricia sat 3 seats away, arms crossed, that same cold smile on her face. The board members listened. They nodded. They said things like, "We'll look into it," and "Let's try to work this out neighborly." But Margaret could see it in their eyes. They were scared of Patricia too. Nobody wanted to become her next target. After the meeting, Margaret tried one more time. She approached Patricia in the parking lot. "Can we talk? Just the two of us? I think there's been a misunderstanding." Patricia looked at her like she was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "There's no misunderstanding. You don't follow rules. You think you're special. You're not. I just want to live peacefully with my mother. Then follow the community guidelines. It's not that hard." Patricia started walking to her car. "Why are you doing this?" Margaret called after her. "What did I ever do to you?" Patricia turned back, and for just a second Margaret saw something in her eyes. Not anger. Something else. Something almost like satisfaction. Like she enjoyed this. "You moved into my neighborhood, that means you follow my rules. And if you don't like it, you can leave." She drove away, leaving Margaret standing under the parking lot lights, feeling more alone than she'd felt in years. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman across the street who seemed to have made destroying her peace into a full-time hobby. She thought about her mother, afraid in her own home. She thought about packing up and leaving, finding somewhere else, starting over again. But then she thought about something her karate instructor had told her years ago, back when she was a teenager getting pushed around at school. True strength isn't about fighting. It's about standing firm when everything in you wants to run. It's about protecting what matters without becoming what you're fighting against. She hadn't understood it then. But lying there in the dark, listening to her mother's soft breathing in the next room, she understood it now. Margaret wasn't going anywhere, and she wasn't going to keep bending every time Patricia snapped her fingers. She just had no idea how soon she'd have to prove it. It happened on a Saturday morning, one of those perfect spring days where the air smells like fresh grass and possibility. Margaret was helping her mother into the car for a doctor's appointment. Nothing special, just a routine checkup. Her mother moved slowly these days, each step careful and deliberate. Margaret held her arm, patient, murmuring encouragements. They were almost there. Her mother's hand was on the car door when Margaret heard the voice. "Excuse me. Excuse me." Patricia was storming across the street, her phone held high in front of her, recording. Her face was red, her jaw set in that familiar expression of self-righteous anger. Margaret felt her stomach drop. "Not now," she said quietly. "Please, we have a doctor's appointment." But Patricia wasn't stopping. She marched right up to their driveway, positioning herself between the car and the street, blocking them in. Her phone camera pointed directly at Margaret's face. "You're violating guest parking policy again," Patricia announced, her voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. "This is the 3rd time this month." Margaret looked around, confused. "We're in our own driveway. You've had that car parked here for over 2 hours multiple times. The rules clearly state it's our car, in our driveway. We're leaving right now for a medical appointment." Margaret kept her voice level, but her heart was hammering. Her mother's hand trembled on her arm. "That's what you always say. You think you can just make up excuses?" Patricia stepped closer, the phone still recording. "I'm documenting this. All of it. Your constant violations, your attitude, everything." Margaret's mother spoke up, her voice weak. "Please, we really need to go. The doctor—" "I don't care about your doctor. Patricia snapped, and that's when she made her mistake. She stepped even closer, invading Margaret's space, her free hand coming up, finger extended, jabbing toward Margaret's face. You people think the rules don't apply to you. You think you can just... It happened so fast that Margaret herself barely registered it. Years of muscle memory, thousands of hours in the dojo, reactions trained so deep they lived in her bones. Patricia's finger came within striking distance of her face, and Margaret's hand moved. Not a strike, not a grab, just a simple deflection. A basic technique she'd taught to hundreds of students. Her hand rose, made contact with Patricia's extended arm, and redirected it smoothly to the side. The movement used Patricia's own momentum against her. It was gentle, really, effortless. But Patricia wasn't expecting any resistance at all. She stumbled backward, her phone nearly dropping, her eyes going wide. She caught herself, but just barely. For the first time since Margaret had met her, Patricia looked genuinely shocked. The street went quiet. A neighbor mowing his lawn had stopped to watch. Someone walking their dog had paused on the sidewalk. Margaret hadn't raised her voice, hadn't made a threatening move, but something had shifted in the air. Patricia's face went from shocked to furious in seconds. You just assaulted me. Did you see that? Did everyone see that? She just attacked me. She was practically screaming now, holding up her phone like evidence. I'm calling the police right now. Right now. You're going to be arrested for assault. Margaret's voice stayed calm, though inside she could feel the old training clicking into place. The centered stance, the controlled breathing, the quiet awareness of everything around her. Please do call them. I'd be happy to have an officer here to document your harassment. I'm sure they'd like to hear about how you've been targeting my elderly mother and blocking us from leaving for a medical appointment. Patricia's finger was already flying across her phone screen, but she paused. Something in Margaret's tone, maybe, or the way she stood there, completely relaxed but somehow immovable, like a tree with deep roots. You're going to regret this, Patricia hissed. I'm going to make your life a living hell. Do you understand me? A living hell. You'll be begging to move out of this neighborhood before I'm done with you. We need to leave now, Margaret said simply. She helped her mother into the car, closed the door gently, and walked around to the driver's side. Patricia stood in the driveway, phone still up, recording everything. Margaret waited. Move, please, Margaret said. We need to leave. Patricia didn't budge for a long moment. Then, probably realizing that blocking someone's car on camera wasn't going to help her case, she stepped aside. But she kept recording as Margaret backed out, her face twisted with rage. Margaret drove in silence for the first few minutes, her hand steady on the wheel. Her mother was crying quietly in the passenger seat. I'm sorry, sweetheart, her mother whispered. This is all my fault. If I didn't need so much help, if you didn't have to take care of me. Mom, stop. Margaret reached over and squeezed her hand. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. But inside, Margaret was shaking. Not from fear, from anger. The kind of anger she hadn't felt in years. The kind that made her want to turn the car around and have a very different kind of conversation with Patricia. But she wouldn't. That wasn't who she was anymore. They made it through the doctor's appointment. Margaret smiled and nodded at the right times, answered questions about her mother's medications, scheduled the next visit. All on autopilot. Her mind was somewhere else, replaying that moment in the driveway over and over. The look on Patricia's face when she deflected her hand. That split second of uncertainty. The email was waiting when they got home. Sent an hour ago while they were still at the doctor's office. The subject line, final warning. Margaret opened it, her mother looking over her shoulder. The message was long, formal, filled with legal-sounding language. Patricia was demanding Margaret's immediate eviction from the neighborhood for violent behavior and repeated violations of community standards. She was calling an emergency HOA board meeting. She was threatening lawsuits, police reports, restraining orders. The email ended with one line that made Margaret's jaw clench. You made a very big mistake today. I always win. Always. Margaret read it twice. Then she closed her laptop and looked at her mother, who was watching her with worried eyes. "What are we going to do?" her mother asked. Margaret thought about the box in her closet, the one with the black belts inside, each one representing years of training, discipline, and a version of herself she'd tried to leave behind. She thought about her instructor's voice. "A black belt doesn't mean you've learned to fight. It means you've learned when not to. But it also meant you knew how to stand your ground when you had no choice." "We're going to that board meeting," Margaret said quietly, "and we're going to end this." Her mother looked at her, really looked at her, and maybe saw something she hadn't seen in years. That quiet strength, that core of steel wrapped in kindness. "Okay," her mother said. "Okay." That night, Margaret opened the closet and pulled out the box. Inside, folded neatly, was her gi, her uniform, and beneath it her black belt. She ran her fingers over the worn fabric, feeling the weight of all those years, all those lessons. She wasn't putting it on to fight. She was putting it on to remember who she really was, someone who'd learned that the greatest strength wasn't in your fists. It was in knowing exactly who you were and refusing to be anything less, no matter who tried to break you down. The board meeting was in 3 days. Patricia had no idea what was coming. The community center meeting room was packed. Margaret arrived 15 minutes early, but already every seat was taken. People lined the walls. She recognized most of them. Neighbors she'd waved to but never really talked to. They weren't here for the usual boring HOA business. They were here for the show. Patricia had made sure of that. She'd sent emails to the entire neighborhood, posted on the community Facebook page, made phone calls. The subject: emergency meeting regarding violent resident behavior. She'd painted Margaret as a threat to the peaceful neighborhood, someone dangerous who needed to be dealt with immediately. Margaret took a seat in the back row, her mother beside her. She'd brought a folder with everything she'd collected over the past months. Screenshots of Patricia's threatening emails, photos of Patricia going through her trash, dates and times of every harassment incident, written statements from her mother's caretaker, from her doctor, from the medical equipment company about the van situation. The board members filed in and took their seats at the front table. 5 of them, all looking uncomfortable. The board president, a tired-looking man named Mr. Chen, who ran the local hardware store, cleared his throat. "Let's get started. This is an emergency session called by Patricia Drummond regarding—" "Thank you, David." Patricia stood up before he could finish. She dressed for the occasion. Dark suit, hair perfect, carrying a leather portfolio that she set on the table with a heavy thunk. Behind her, a laptop was already connected to the projector screen. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia began, her voice carrying that smooth confidence of someone who's given 1,000 sales pitches. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I know this is unusual, but we have a serious situation that requires immediate action." She clicked her remote. The projector screen lit up with the title, "Resident Violations and Aggressive Behavior, a Case Study." Margaret felt her mother's hand grip hers under the table. Patricia's presentation was thorough. She had to give her that. Slide after slide of Margaret's supposed violations. Photos of the mailbox that was allegedly the wrong shade. The wind chimes. The recycling bins. The wheelchair ramp. Each one labeled with dates, times. Violation codes from the HOA handbook. "As you can see," Patricia continued, her voice taking on a somber tone, "this resident has shown a complete disregard for our community standards from day one. But that's not even the worst part." She clicked to the next slide. A still frame from her phone video, frozen on the moment in the driveway. Margaret's hand was blurred with motion, Patricia stumbling backward. 3 days ago, this resident physically attacked me, in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, when I was simply trying to enforce our parking policies. Patricia's voice trembled just slightly. Academy Award worthy, Margaret thought. Murmurs rippled through the room. People leaned forward in their seats. "I have the full video," Patricia said. "I've already filed a police report, but I believe this board has a responsibility to act first, to protect this community. I'm calling for an immediate vote to begin eviction proceedings." She sat down, looking satisfied. The room buzzed with whispered conversations. Mr. Chen looked at Margaret. "Would you like to respond?" Margaret stood up. Her legs felt steady. Her breathing was calm. All those years of bowing before sparring matches, of centering herself before breaking boards, of learning to find quiet in the middle of chaos. It all came back, thank you, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but somehow it cut through the noise. People quieted down to hear her. I do have a response. But first, I'd like to know if anyone else in this room has received similar treatment from Patricia. Silence. People looked at their laps, at the walls, anywhere but at Patricia. Because I've been here 4 months, Margaret continued, and in that time, I've received 47 violation notices. I've been photographed without my permission, had my trash searched through, been blocked from leaving my own driveway, and had my elderly mother, who's recovering from a stroke, harassed and threatened. She opened her folder. I have documentation of all of this, emails, photos, witness statements. I was going to share them tonight. But honestly, I don't think that's what this is really about. She looked directly at Patricia for the first time. This is about control. This is about someone who's used fear to run this neighborhood for so long that everyone's too scared to speak up. A man in the middle row shifted in his seat. He was older, maybe 70, with a military bearing. Margaret had seen him working on his car sometimes. I'll speak up, he said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Patricia fined me $600 last year because my grandson's basketball hoop was visible from the street. Said it violated aesthetic standards. My grandson was visiting for the summer. He's 9 years old. Wanted to shoot hoops with his grandpa. The room went still. A young woman near the front raised her hand tentatively. She made us remove our garden vegetables. Said vegetables weren't appropriate landscaping. We were trying to save money on groceries. She threatened to fine us for having a rainbow flag. Another voice called out. Said it was too political. More hands went up. More voices. The floodgates had opened. Story after story poured out. Patricia sat rigid in her seat, her face getting redder with each testimony. That's enough. Patricia stood up abruptly. These people are just bitter because they couldn't follow simple rules. Every single one of them was treated fairly, and you bullied all of us, the military man said, standing now too. For years. And we let you because it was easier than fighting back. Patricia's face twisted with rage. She turned to Margaret. This is your fault. You turned them against me. Ever since you moved here with your attitude, thinking you're better than everyone, I never thought that, Margaret said calmly. I just wanted to live peacefully. You attacked me. Patricia's voice was rising to a shout now. You assaulted me in my own neighborhood. Show the full video, Margaret said. Show everyone what really happened. Patricia hesitated. Just for a second, but everyone saw it. Show them how you blocked us from leaving for a medical appointment, Margaret continued. Show them how you got in my face while I was helping my disabled mother into the car. Show them exactly what happened. I don't have to show anyone anything. Patricia moved toward Margaret now, her finger pointing, her face contorted with anger. You don't get to come into my neighborhood and... She shoved Margaret. Both hands against her shoulders hard. It was like watching water flow around a rock. Margaret didn't resist, didn't push back. She simply moved. One step to the side, a subtle rotation of her hips, and Patricia's momentum carried her forward into empty space. The larger woman stumbled, her expensive heels catching on the carpet, and she sat down hard on the floor. The room gasped. Patricia looked up from the floor, more shocked than hurt, trying to understand what had just happened. How she'd ended up there. Margaret extended her hand to help her up. Patricia stared at it like it was a snake. Mr. Chen stood up from the board table. Was that... Did you just... He looked at Margaret with new eyes. That was a trained technique. What was that? Margaret pulled her hand back since Patricia wouldn't take it. Shotokan karate. 4th degree black belt. I haven't practiced in about 5 years, but I guess some things you don't forget. The room exploded with whispers. Patricia scrambled to her feet on her own, her face now a deep red. You've been trained this whole time? Someone asked. I taught self-defense for 15 years, Margaret said simply. But I left that behind. I came here for peace, not conflict. I never wanted any of this. The military man was smiling now, a knowing look on his face. I knew it. The way you carry yourself. I thought maybe, but I wasn't sure. Patricia stood there, breathing hard, looking around at the room full of people who were now looking at her differently. Who were no longer afraid. This is ridiculous, she said, but her voice had lost its power. I'm the victim here. I'm the one who was attacked. Twice now. Patricia, Mr. Chen said, and his voice was firm in a way Margaret hadn't heard before. I think we need to talk. Board members, let's take a 10-minute recess. Patricia, please come with us to the side room. As the board filed out, neighbors started approaching Margaret. thanking her, apologizing for not speaking up sooner, asking about her karate background. Her mother sat there beaming with pride. Margaret just felt tired. She didn't want to be a hero. She just wanted to go home and sit in her garden. But maybe, she thought, looking around at these people finding their voices, maybe sometimes standing up for yourself means helping others find the courage to stand up too. The board meeting ended very differently than Patricia had planned. After 45 minutes behind closed doors, the board members emerged looking grim. Mr. Chen's announcement was brief and professional. The board would be conducting a full investigation into Patricia's conduct as HOA president. Until that investigation was complete, she was suspended from all HOA duties. Patricia tried to argue. She threatened lawsuits, claimed discrimination, said they'd all regret this, but her voice didn't carry the same weight anymore. People weren't looking at their shoes when she talked. They were looking right at her, arms crossed, done with being afraid. She left the community center alone, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the pavement, her leather portfolio clutched to her chest like a shield. Margaret went home and made her mother tea. They sat on the porch together for the first time in weeks, listening to the night sounds of the neighborhood. Her mother didn't say much, just held Margaret's hand and smiled that soft smile that meant everything. The investigation took 3 weeks. Turned out once people started talking, they couldn't stop. Neighbors who'd been silent for years came forward with stories. The young couple who'd been fined into near bankruptcy over lawn violations that didn't exist. The retired teacher who'd sold his house just to escape Patricia's constant harassment. The single dad who'd been threatened with legal action because his kids' toys were visible in the backyard. One woman broke down crying at a board meeting, describing how Patricia had reported her to child services, claiming neglect because her children played outside unsupervised. They were teenagers. The investigation had traumatized the whole family. The more the board dug, the worse it got. Patricia had been using her position to settle personal grudges, target people she didn't like, and control the neighborhood through fear. She'd manipulated HOA funds to pay for personal legal threats. She'd falsified violation reports. She'd even been caught on the community center's security cameras tampering with mailboxes to create violations. The board's decision was unanimous. Patricia was removed from her position permanently and banned from holding any HOA office. They also recommended that affected residents consider taking legal action if they chose. To Patricia put her house on the market 2 days. Later, Margaret heard about it from the neighbor who'd spoken up about the basketball hoop, a kind man named Leonard who'd started waving to her every morning. Good riddance, he'd said, but Margaret noticed he looked more relieved than angry. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday. Margaret saw it on her way to work and felt nothing, really. Not satisfaction, not triumph. Just a quiet kind of peace, like when you finally put down something heavy you've been carrying too long. But there was something she needed to do first. That evening, Margaret baked cookies. Chocolate chip from her grandmother's recipe, the kind that made your whole house smell like home. She put them on a nice plate, covered them with foil, and wrote a short note on a card her mother helped her pick out. I hope you find peace wherever you go. Everyone deserves a fresh start. She walked down to Patricia's house just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Patricia's car was in the driveway. Lights were on inside. Margaret could see moving boxes stacked by the window. She set the plate on the doorstep, propped the note against it, rang the doorbell, and walked away. She didn't wait to see if Patricia would answer. This wasn't about getting thanks or acknowledgement. It was about choosing to be kind even when someone had tried their hardest to break you, maybe especially then. The next morning, the plate was gone. Margaret never knew if Patricia took the cookies or threw them away. It didn't matter. The gesture was the point. Patricia moved out 3 weeks later. Margaret watched the moving truck from her garden, where she was planting tomatoes. Her mother sat nearby in her wheelchair, pointing out where she thought the basil should go. They didn't celebrate, they just kept planting. Life in the neighborhood shifted after that. The new HOA president was Leonard, the military man with the grandson who liked basketball. His first act was to throw out half the ridiculous rules in the handbook. Mailboxes could be any shade of black. Garden gnomes were officially permitted. Kids could have basketball hoops. But more than the rules changing, something else shifted. People talked to each other now. They stopped in the street to chat. They helped each other with yard work. It was like the whole neighborhood had been holding its breath for years, and finally, everyone could exhale. Margaret started teaching again. Not formally, not in a dojo. Just a free self-defense class at the community center on Saturday mornings. It started with 3 people, then 8, then 15. Mostly women and teenage girls, but some men too. People who'd felt powerless and wanted to learn what Margaret knew. That strength wasn't about fighting. It was about knowing you could handle whatever came, and that confidence changed how you moved through the world. Leonard's grandson came sometimes, the 9-year-old who just wanted to play basketball with his grandpa. Margaret taught him how to break a board, and his face when he finally did it, that mix of shock and pride and pure joy, reminded her why she'd loved teaching in the first place. Her mother got stronger too. Started sitting on the porch again, wind chimes reinstalled and tinkling softly in the breeze. Neighbors would stop by with cookies or just to chat. The woman who'd been forced to remove her vegetable garden brought over tomatoes from her newly replanted beds. The young couple with the rainbow flag invited them to a barbecue. One Saturday, about 6 months after Patricia left, Margaret was in the community center showing a nervous teenager how to escape a wrist grab. The girl was small, scared, said she was being bullied at school. Margaret demonstrated the technique, smooth and simple, then watched as the girl tried it herself. "I can't do it," the girl said, frustrated. "You just did," Margaret pointed out. "You're already doing it. You just don't believe it yet." The girl tried again. This time her movement was cleaner, more confident. Margaret saw the moment it clicked, that flash in the girl's eyes when she realized she was stronger than she thought. After class, Margaret sat in her car for a moment before driving home. She thought about Patricia sometimes, wondered where she'd ended up, if she was still angry or if she'd found some peace. She hoped it was the latter. Carrying that much anger around was exhausting. Margaret knew. She'd felt it that day in the driveway, that urge to respond to aggression with aggression. But she'd learned something better years ago, standing in a dojo with a wise instructor who'd seen a scared 13-year-old and taught her not just how to fight, but when not to. Real strength was choosing kindness when cruelty was easier. It was standing firm without becoming hard. It was protecting yourself and others without losing your humanity in the process. She drove home to find her mother in the garden, humming to herself while she watered the tomatoes. The sun was setting again, painting everything gold. The neighborhood was quiet in that good way, where the silence felt peaceful instead of tense. Margaret joined her mother in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds, planting new seeds. They worked in comfortable silence, just the two of them, and the sound of wind chimes and distant laughter from kids playing basketball in Leonard's driveway. She'd come here looking for peace. It had taken longer than expected, and the path had been harder than she'd hoped. But sitting there in her garden, dirt under her fingernails, her mother humming beside her, neighbors she could actually call friends now, Margaret realized she'd found it, not because the bully left, but because she'd learned something she'd somehow forgotten in those 5 years away from the dojo. You don't find peace by avoiding conflict. You find it by knowing exactly who you are and refusing to let anyone make you less than that, no matter how hard they try. The garden gnome sat proudly by the flowers now, right where her mother had always wanted it. Margaret smiled at it, then got back to work. There were tomatoes to plant, and summer was coming.